God, in these human words which I speak, may there be a word from you, heard in our minds and in our hearts, that in hearing we might be made truly alive for your sake. Amen. You know, it's really only been within the past year or two that I've even begun to be able to host without being a sort of anxious mess about it. You know, worried about all of the moving pieces and distracted from my guests by one task after another, struggling to really be present for more than a few minutes before being distracted again by the next thing that needs doing. You might relate to that. And then when I am able to accomplish sort of non-anxious, fully present hosting, it's generally because I have remembered to give myself a talking to beforehand, right? To remind myself that it's less about a perfect menu or a spotless house, right? And more about spending time, connecting with family and friends. Which is all to say, Martha sort of gets the short end of the stick in today's reading, and I get where she's coming from. I really do. There's something about having company that highlights every possible task and makes each cluttered corner glaringly obvious as if it has its own neon sign, right? And brings up these dormant anxieties about presentation, about my cooking, about how everything looks and making things just so. I think in general, in the rest of my life, I'm probably more a Mary than a Martha, but hosting it makes me wonder if maybe Martha is also more present and contemplative under ordinary circumstances. There's something like a well-respected and highly anticipated guest that sends anxiety into overdrive. So I say that all to say, I want to encourage us to resist the traditional interpretation that we've maybe heard over and over again about this passage. That interpretation in its most simplistic form, sounding essentially like Mary got it right by being, and Martha got it wrong by doing, right? So 2 things about that reading. First, Jesus comes off as a bit of a scold through that lens, right? And I think it's easy to let our own inner voices, our own insecurities and projections and internal narratives sort of overinterpret Jesus in this passage. So I want to offer this. I think that in most cases, if we hear Jesus as harsh or dismissive or cruel or indifferent, it's probably not Jesus we're hearing so much as our own inner critic, right? Our own sort of trauma and experiences and cultural messaging and preoccupations, right? So I want to avoid that dichotomized reading of this story because I think it risks misunderstanding Jesus here and replacing him with our own baggage. I also want to avoid it because, look, if we're having dinner together, somebody has got to cook, someone needs to set the table, right? This isn't an either-or situation. The world would fall apart if we all lived on one side or the other of this sort of false Mary-Martha dichotomy. We need both, right? This is a both-and situation. Like with most things, the answer is less in stark black and white and somewhere in the nuanced middle. So, to look at this vignette through a more nuanced lens, perhaps, I don't think the problem is Martha's busyness per se, right? It's not the doing that's the issue, although busyness for its own sake can become problematic, right? But I think the issue here is actually about her distraction. The tasks are what they are until they become their own point, when really The point is sitting in the living room with Mary at his feet. Martha, Martha, you're worried and distracted by many things. There's need of only one thing, Jesus says. That one thing, of course, is him, right? And being present with the one always present to us, listening, learning, delighting in the company of this most honored dinner guest. Nothing to prove or to earn. Jesus has already shown up, right? He always does. He's already in your living room. Why are you hustling and bustling as if to earn his favor? As if to coax him to come to your house for dinner. And so while Martha clatters resentfully around the kitchen, hustling for her own worthiness, to borrow Brene Brown's phrase, Mary seems unconcerned with pleasing or performing or proving herself. Her focus is not on what she has to show or how much she can do. It's on Jesus. Mary is present to God's presence. I was recently on a big family vacation in the Outer Banks, as we do every now and then, every few years, spending time with family I don't necessarily see all that often, including my 3 nieces and a nephew, ages almost 5, 6, 7, and 12. And as you can imagine, the kids are always happy to be around their many aunts and uncles. And we give the parents a little bit of a break, right? Because they come to us instead, to the ones they see less often, of course, to ask for a long list of things: piggyback rides and wave jumping buddies and kite flying assistants and walks with the dog down the beach and the next victim to be buried in the sand, and on and on and on. And so at the beach, receiving this seemingly endless list of requests for one thing or another, I began to realize that while it felt like they were asking for action, tasks of this thing or that, right? What they were really asking for was presence, right? Connection. Be with me. Spend time. Be present. That became clear when I realized that more often than not, they were just as content to sit in the chair next to mine or take up residence on the beach blanket and just be together. Savor this rare time spent in one another's company. Like Mary in this story, they were focused on the good part, right? The better part, delighting in time spent together, savoring connection and presence. And that's such a great gift from kids, right? They're so unself-consciously themselves that they invite us to simply be present too. Our translation of this passage has Jesus calling Mary's approach the better part, but the word can also be translated as good, the good part. And I like that better, not only because it feels less dichotomized and competitive, but also because there are many parts at play at a dinner or a family vacation, right? But the good part, that's the time spent in the presence of your people, right? That's connection and being together and attending to the moment at hand. And the good news, meant in the sense of capital G, capital N, gospel good news, right? The good news is that that is what we're made for connection, for presence, for delight in this improbable life on this improbably miraculous planet. Last morning of vacation, my dad sent a text that said simply, "Life is grace on this blue-green planet." A gift at the end of a week spent in delight in one another and presence. Speaking of this blue-green planet in an unfathomably vast universe, I hope you've seen the Webb telescope images that have been coming out over the past week or so. Stunning, right? It's absolutely amazing, and a surefire way to feel small in a universe that is so big and on a planet that seems suspended from nothing, right? And for me, a reason for such gratitude that we simply get to exist in such a place. And a very good way to put into perspective the futility of our efforts to earn our worthiness for that, right? Through task after task, busily doing and hustling and making sure everything is just so, and we have some body of work to prove that we were here. The good part is the simple fact of being here, right? And that is pure gift. We can't earn what we've already been given. And the effort is a waste of the precious little time we have. And I think when we begin to realize that and slow down and sit with delight in the present moment, perhaps gazing in awe at galaxies far, far away, we begin to realize with Mary that presence and connection and life itself are the good part, and that can't be taken away from us, except through our own penchant for distraction and our tendency to mistake a peripheral thing for the one thing, right? The true thing, the good part. It's easy to get caught up in this sort of never-ending swirl of tasks and priority setting and going, doing, and when our overcommitment threatens to swallow us and we can't seem to figure out how to be still, right? When we've given in to so-called hustle culture and forgotten that our worthiness isn't, in fact, linked to our productivity, there Jesus sits. Right there in the living room, waiting for us to step away from 3 pots boiling on the stove while the dishwasher hums and we chop onions and think through the timing of dessert, right? Waiting for us to come back to our senses, right? Which is the only way we can be in the present moment, right? To savor the smells coming from the pots and the sound of laughter coming from the living room. There is relief for the busyness and the anxiety and the distraction. The good part is available right here and now, if only we'd slow down enough to participate in it. You are meant for delight. That's how I think of the subtext under Jesus' words when he speaks to Martha in this passage. You are meant for delight. Slow down. This delight is for you too. It's for Martha, it's for me, it's for you all, it's for all of us, right? It's why we're here. We're made by a God who delights in us. So even when the price of slowing down seems too high, or the world seems too bleak and fragile, and not just even, especially then, right? It's especially important then. I saw a meme this week that went like this: the news saying, everything is bad. And the poets responding, okay, but what if everything is bad and we still fall in love with the moon and learn something from the flowers? Thank goodness for the poets. I think God must be a poet. I also think that if we can slow down enough to be present, right? Enough to fall in love with the moon and learn something from the flowers and gaze in awe at the Southern Ring Nebula, then we'll have to admit that not everything is bad. That some things are arrestingly beautiful and wonderful and life-giving, and that those things not only matter quite a lot, because they do, but they're always here, all around us, available if only we can put down the distractions and the preoccupations that crowd them out. Martha comes to Jesus to ask him to set Mary to work helping her, right? She's angry that she's doing all of this by herself, and we get it, right? But instead of the response she hopes for, Jesus says, but why? Why are you so busy doing all these things? Right? The most important thing is right before you, and you're missing it altogether. Slow down, Martha. Sit. Life is here and now. It's full of delight, and the delight is really the whole point. It's what you were made for. You don't have to prove your worthiness to exist. Your existence is its own proof. Come sit a spell, I hear Jesus saying. Rest your feet. Tell me your dreams. Let's gaze at the stars. Let's wonder about the world and give thanks for the joy and the miracle of life in it. He doesn't have much longer at this point in the story, and he knows it. When he stops by to visit with Martha and Mary, he's on his way to Jerusalem, to the cross. So this lesson in savoring what is before us is even more poignant, right? Life is short, and the opportunities for rest and stillness, for delight and connection are many. They are many, if only we can stay focused on the good part. So, when we feel more like Martha than Mary, I hope we can hear this story not as a scolding or an admonition, but as an invitation, right? An invitation to slow down, to linger in the good part, to take delight in the simple pleasures of connection, of a shared meal, of flying a kite on the beach, right? To know that you are worthy of that delight and peace simply because you were made by a God who delights in you. You don't have to earn it or hustle for your worthiness. Come sit a spell. Amen.